jumping on the physical tests and the sports science and the medical team. We take over. It's our one day in the sun, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And that's why most of the managers around will go there in the morning and try to actually lift the players before they get battered by you lot the whole afternoon. Sometimes these things people, if it's a military base that you go to, they'll say, we'll tell you who the leaders are. I don't know whether an escape room necessarily, there's an element of intelligence also comes down to the one that's talking and getting.
Players sweating on treadmills or on bikes or jumping up and down, and people must think, what the hell is that all about? I suppose the easiest way to describe it, it's like the annual MOT of all of the players, really.
And I'd be joking with the rest of the lads saying, I love this. I said, I'd rather, I said, when the ball comes out, that's when it starts getting complicated. I said, this bit's easy. And it actually helped me. I wasn't the best runner in the group, but I'd always be up there and I'd always find it mentally actually quite good, quite interesting, whereas a lot of players would beat themselves. It's like you're coming out of the canteen, they've probably had too much to eat for lunch, and they're already talking themselves out of the run.
Welcome, football fans, to Breaking Lines, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the beautiful game like never before. I'm Gary Rowett, former player and manager, joined by the insightful Dave Carolan, a man with his finger on the pulse of football's beating heart. Together, Dave and I bring you unrivaled insight, context, and a few stories from the trenches. Join us as we dissect the game, break down the plays, and explore the intricate dance between managers, players, fans, and the beautiful game itself. This is Breaking Lines, where the game is more than just a match.
Avengers assemble. It's pre-season time on Breaking Lines, and as we speak, it's a Friday night and it's a few days before we'd normally be going back to pre-season, but we're already seeing teams back, and it's that long road in front of them where the next 5 or 6 weeks are all the preparation before the season begins. Gary, how much did you enjoy pre-season?
This is how much I enjoyed it, Dave. I'm having a beer now in celebration of the fact that I'm not a player going back right now. But yeah, look, I think that, pre-season was always one that as a player, there was that nervous anticipation back then because you knew it was going to be bloody hard, basically. Do you know what I mean? You at that point, you would run probably for the first 3 or 4 days without seeing a ball. Then the ball would come in and you would still run virtually every afternoon. And some of the runs, if I'm being honest, some of the runs compared to the ones that we would use, which I think are far more scientific, of course, but some of the runs would be a bit easier. I think personally, back in those days, it was run till you drop. And I think that created a certain element of fitness. But I think there's also that element of if you train twice a day, often enough, you're going to get fit regardless, even if you don't train well. You're going to reach an element of fitness just because of the load. So yeah, it's interesting seeing some of the pictures online and some of the quotes from people and clubs that are already back in, and some that will have been back in probably a week or so. What would be your sort of perfect pre-season length? Would you say?
Oh, I think if you're going any more than really 6 weeks for me, then you're probably dragging it out because let's be honest, it's a phony war for about 5 or 6 weeks, isn't it? Where everybody's just waiting to get to the start of the season. So you want to get the right amount of time to get the work in that you need. And over the years, we've probably ended up settling on around 5.5 weeks. That gives us enough time to do the work we want without everybody feeling like it's dragging too far. Although the players still complain that it's gone too long, don't they? After about 2 days. But yeah, I think I've seen people come back in for like 2 weeks and then have a week off and then go back for 6 weeks. And sometimes you feel it's a never-ending preseason. It almost sometimes feels like the close season, you didn't really have any time off because you've never had a breakaway. But I suppose the first day back, though, is that special day where it's like 25 times the same conversations with the same people, all with the same chat before it's jumping on the physical tests and the sports science and the medical team. We take over. It's our one day in the sun, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And that's why most of the managers around will go there in the morning and try to actually lift the players before they get battered by you lot whole afternoon. But no, I think it's funny, isn't it? Because if we could find a way to rehash the manager's talk afterwards in the manager's office, the first day of pre-season would be similar. Of course, you know the players and you have a bit better relationship, but more often than not, it's where did you go on holiday? Who went on the most exotic holiday? Where did you you just tend to have those similar conversations. How was your summer? Most people talk from that. As a footballer, most players have to, of course, cram in as many holidays. Most players cram in all the holidays, don't they? So so I was thinking about it earlier. I thought if you're a player, someone like, let's say you're a player from Germany, and you're going to go probably straight away want to go on holiday. You're probably then going to want to go back home and see your family. At some point you might then have a different type of holiday with your friends or whatever it is, and there's always that fine line where you think, well, are you going to spend much time in the UK or is most of that 6 weeks or 7 weeks or whatever it is, spending time traveling and seeing people that you haven't had the opportunity to in the season? And if you're based here, you're trying to get away maybe 2 or 3 occasions and you're still trying to do some of the things that you haven't been able to do. So it goes quite quick, doesn't it? I've often found that it goes quite quick. But of course, that first day back, it is a chance to catch up with everyone, see what sort of, everyone's happy, aren't they? Most players don't admit it, but most of them are like, I'm kind of glad to get back. I kind of miss football. I miss the lads, I miss the team spirit and the crack and the banter that flies around. And the truth be known, like we probably miss that all a little bit as well. So that first morning, we would normally let the players come in, wouldn't we? Let's say testing was at 11. We'd get the players maybe in at 9 o'clock and we wouldn't be in a rush to start, would we? Because,
No.
The longer they can mill around, chat, get back together, get that little bit of a sort of synergy back within the group. And often also you might have some new players as well that are finding their way into that group. And those moments at breakfast where they've maybe got an extra half an hour are important, aren't they? Because, they'll sit and chat and get to know people. So yeah, asking players where they've been and then remembering it 3 days later when you're chatting to them again is the challenge, I think. But yeah, we've had some interesting ones. Most of the lads players go far more exotic places now. It's interesting. You ask many of them where they went on holiday. Not many of them say Magaluf anymore.
No, I think Magaluf's firmly off the trail now.
Yeah, we've had like Thailand. I'm not sure why they were going there, but we've had Thailand. We've had, I think one of the players went to see the pyramids.
Safari. We've had a
safari. Yeah, I think these are all the same player, by the way. I think everyone else probably did go to Magaluf. That was a problem.
But that was that cultural player that we had one year. Remember him? Yeah, really good. He had culture.
Actually didn't think the same as everyone else. Yeah. So players do go to, players are going further afield. Players are, the world's such a small place now, isn't it? And you can certainly have some very interesting conversations about where people have chose to holiday during the 6 weeks.
So while you coaches are having chats about holidays and what people were up to, and of course introducing the new player who's just arrived, because it's generally speaking there's maybe one, if you're lucky there's maybe 2, that there's fresh meat on the table as such, so the players can all get to meet the new player and kind of sound them out. The rest of us, the people who do the real work, the medical and performance team, like we've got medical examinations for once the doctors are actually doing more than just, drinking tea. Only joking, doctors. The physio team, they're doing all the musculoskeletal tests.
500 quid a cup for doctors, isn't it?
There we are, yeah, with interest. Yeah, and inflation added to that. And then, of course, we may have a fitness test that day as well. So we'll see all sorts of videos online now of players sweating on treadmills or on bikes or jumping up and down, and people must think, what the hell is that all about? I suppose the easiest way to describe it, it's like the annual MOT of all of the players, really, isn't it?
I like the way you put that. Yeah, I mean, because you have to have an MOT, so the players have no choice with that one. But yeah, no, it is interesting, is it? Because you sometimes learn quite a lot on that first day. I think you learn players. It doesn't always correlate to, because sometimes someone might have had a really tough season, might have had an injury towards the end, might have felt they needed to do less over the summer, might have almost accepted maybe they'll come in a little bit less fit. Where some players might have had a poor season and are super motivated to make sure they come back flying. So you sometimes see that in those early sort of hours, don't you? But they go off to you guys and they do all those different tests. So they do some of the sort of benchmarking tests that you guys would do. You get weighed, you get body fat. There's all sorts of things. We've done it before with the old the lactate testing on treadmills, haven't we? All those type of things. I think sometimes this is not a criticism of sports science, Dave. I'm not going to get controversial, but because this isn't how we've done it. But I think certainly as a player, I found if you were going to do certain things pre-season, really, then they should have been repeated during the season, or they should have given you some sort. Because you know what it's like. You always have that one pre-season where everyone turns up. They want everything to look brilliant, and you never, ever do those things again. So I think there has to be a real method to your madness, doesn't there, in what you're doing? And I think you've tended to get that balance really good.
You got to pick a test that you can do a few times. Otherwise it's just showboating. It's sports science showboating.
That's what I was talking about. Yes, absolutely. When you come back and there's a test that someone's managed to get you to pay for like some sort of amazing testing, and you're thinking, well, I've got the results, but I'm never doing this ever again. So what's the point? But anyway, I think then you start to lead into getting out onto the grass, don't you? And certainly that has certain parameters that have not changed, have they? I mean, what we would tend to that first afternoon or that first day or that second day, because maybe the first day would be just testing, wouldn't it? It would allow the medical and the performance team a chance to get all those parameters that all those measurements that you need to sort of shape certain things, and then day two would often be get out on the grass, wouldn't it? And it would be a mixture, There would be some elements of football, there'd be some elements of physicality, and the physical one always tickles me because there's always little things, like I said earlier, little things to learn. I mean, we've had one player, I don't know if he should remain nameless, but was it the mass test, the 1,500 meters?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Field-based running test for everyone who doesn't know what that is. It's 1,500 meters, generally as fast as you can.
Yeah, basically as fast as you can. And one player actually had to stop. So 1,500 meters. So you're not even running a mile, right? You're not even running a mile, and you're running it reasonably quick, but not horrifically quick. And we had one player threw up halfway through the test in a bush.
Yes.
That player we won't name, but is now a fully fledged international and a top footballer. So you get all sorts, don't you? You get players that you will almost give up during it because they're like, that's not for me. And you're like, yeah, but we're trying to gain an understanding of where you're at, because you're going to have to run a lot further than 1,500 meters when the games start, don't you? But some players, when there's no ball there, just find that mentally so taxing, don't they?
And then you have other players who love fitness work. It's what they're good at. In fact, it may be what gets them even a contract and in the team, because you just have some players who are maybe not as blessed on the technical side, but on the physical side, they're monsters, aren't they? They're the ones who actually maybe would love us to go back to the days when there was a lot of cross-country running, and they could shine in all of that stuff. Whereas nowadays, it's a lot of integrated kind of football-based fitness, isn't it? You must have enjoyed the running bit. You love running.
Oh, mate, Dave, I trained myself over the years, right? So I spent probably 5 or 6 pre-seasons. And bear in mind, I was at Cambridge at the time when John Beck was the manager. And I remember us going to Bournemouth once or somewhere around there. And we travelled to the New Forest to do a running session. and we had to get off one of the hills because there was conservationists on it saying the hill was eroding. It was that steep, and we're trying to run up it, and we're getting chucked off it. So there was some really, really brutal sessions in the early days of me sort of starting out in football, which you'll remember that far back because you'd have been the same. Now, when you've done those first few pre-seasons or those first 5 or 6 pre-seasons, I could run, but there was always someone who was just thinking, like pre-season was a horrible experience when you were younger. So I got myself to a point where I almost trained myself mentally to talk myself through it and just say, I love pre-season. I love it. I embraced it. I didn't necessarily, but I got myself to that point. And I'd be on the start line at a run and I'd be joking with the rest of the lads saying, I love this. I said, I said, when the ball comes out, that's when it starts getting complicated. I said, this bit's easy. And it actually helped me. I wasn't the best runner in the group, but I'd always be up there and I'd always find it mentally actually quite good, quite interesting. Whereas a lot of players would beat themselves. It's like you're coming out of the canteen. They've probably had too much to eat for lunch and they're already talking themselves out of the run. Dave, how far is it? How many are we doing, Dave? How many reps are we doing, Dave? Dave, is this hard? So basically they're already talking themselves out of it mentally, aren't they? So I think that's the challenge.
It's an easy day tomorrow. It's still day one.
Dave, is there a day off this week? You're like, we've only back day one. But that's what players genuinely are like, aren't they?
Well, let's be honest. Like, if you were a good runner back then, you were probably up against a few lads who had maybe put on at least 7 to 10 kilos in close season. So you knew those guys are going to be miles behind. Nowadays, though, that's not happening anymore. There's people going on pre-season camps, like they go on a camp to get ready for pre-season. I mean, it's great and it's diligent by the players nowadays and the commitment to stay fit. But also, there's part of you thinking, you spend so much time training during the year that in groups or with somebody else, just follow your club program. It's not easy for everybody to have to come back and literally extend the whole season by another 4 weeks by going to Dubai to do a camp, going to Spain to do a camp, getting your own personal trainer, and then essentially you only ever have 2 weeks off in the year anyway. That's a change, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a massive change. I think that in some ways that shows the diligence and the professionalism of the players and their outlook on the game at times now. I think some of it looks great, doesn't it? Like, I'm sure that I'm sure that from a social media perspective as well, that looks fantastic. So maybe they're on holiday somewhere like a Mykonos and they turn up for one day and put every session they've done and spread it out over a week.
What you mean? They take different kind of pieces of kit and then film like 4 or 5 different sessions at the same time and make it as if they've been. Oh, okay, interesting theory.
That potentially has been done before, hasn't it? Where a player sent the same picture of the same bike of the same exact session to the second and meter. Silly boy.
No names mentioned.
Silly boy. Anyway, but players will try stuff. So but I think that has changed. I think, like we would always say, wouldn't we? It depends on how your season's gone, but a season is a long season mentally and physically, whatever anyone thinks. It's a long, like, if you think about it, you've got, 46 weeks essentially where you're in work, working hard, thinking about the game, coming in every day or whatever that might be. Then you've got 6 weeks off. So it's not a long time really to have away from the game. And most players, I would say we would encourage players probably 2 weeks of just do more or less nothing. Just give your brain a rest, give your body a rest, just allow yourself a chance to recover maybe, and then start. But a lot of players now wouldn't want to do that. They would want to get straight in the gym. They want to still look good. They want to, whether that's functional or not, they'd still want to do something. They'd still want to keep active. And in a strange way, the way that pre-season has worked and the information you can get from athletes now, the top athletes, we've spoke about it before, have very few days off. So maybe players now mindset is, I don't need lots of time off. I just maybe don't need to be playing football for 6 weeks. Do you know what I mean? I maybe just need to be, doing something I want to do, but staying really active. And that's probably why players come back in. Players now come back virtually how they left, don't they? In fact, we've had some players probably come back in better physical condition in terms of their body fat and their, and their sort of strength maybe in certain ways because they're not playing football and they haven't got the rigors of that. So what do you think it's changed? Do you think the players, your experiences, or is it that you would give them an off-season program, wouldn't you? So maybe explain that, Dave, what you would give players off-season so that actually one of the reasons why they come back in so good.
Yeah, I think we do encourage them to have time off, especially in that first week, 10 days, even up to 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, I think if you're taking time off now, you're starting to decline in fitness. So I suppose over the years we've encouraged players, like you've just spent 46 weeks getting up to, you're not in prime fitness when the season ends because you've got an accumulation of fatigue, haven't you? Everybody's kind of tired. You're kind of running on fumes a little bit. So that break is welcomed. And then you refresh mentally, a little bit physically, then you start getting going again. And as you say, when the players come back in, if a good close season has been administered by the players, and let's be honest, probably less than 50% of them actually follow what the club are saying. They all think they can get their own trainer or they got their own ideas or whatever. But generally speaking, the close season programs that the club will give them, if they're well designed, should have you coming in near ready to be able to complete the club's pre-season. Now, obviously, players have different opinions and the people they work with have different opinions about how you want to go back. But essentially, the job is to get you to the start line, ready to go to start the pre-season, which is then going to build on the work that you did. So I normally take the opportunity here to build on capacities that we don't get an awful lot of time to work on during the season. Obviously, we do 46 weeks, 46 years, it feels like at times, but 46 weeks of football training. So I can build an aerobic base, a strength base, a power base that I normally can't give that time over to because we're trying to balance a football training. But I think you're exactly right when you say the players sometimes come back fitter or looking leaner because they haven't been eating like they're preparing for games and preparing for training. So maybe they change their diet a little bit. Maybe it's not always optimal, but they are pretty religious, most of them now, in terms of eating good quality food and the right types of stuff throughout the season. So we don't mind them changing that up. Obviously, it's in moderation, but I think
the players don't drink that. The players don't drink that much either, Dave, do they? That's another thing. It's like players don't. Again, you go back a decent time. Players would drink quite heavily, wouldn't they? Off season. Yeah. On holiday, they'd be on it. Do you know what I mean? Even in the season. But I think players have a very different mindset now. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, and not every player would have done it back in the day. But and players would drink now and some wouldn't. But I would say the vast majority of players now wouldn't tend to drink very much alcohol at all. So I think that also probably aids, that sort of professional side and maybe their approach as well.
Well, I think maybe they're better at hiding it if they are doing it, so that's a different challenge, isn't it? But listen, we've got them in the building. Let's be honest. Yes, we remember the days when there was plenty of cross-country running and there was a load of fitness. Nowadays, it's an all-in integrated approach and the balls are out on day one. All the classic cliches that we're going to hear in the interviews by sports science people, managers, head coaches, players. The balls are out on day one. And I mean footballs by that.
It's been a very positive few weeks. You've never heard anyone after a pre-season trip say, it's been an awful camp. We've not enjoyed one little bit of it. There's been nothing to do. You don't hear that, do you? Like you say, everyone says the same thing. It's been a brilliant week. The players have worked so hard. We're in a great place.
Everyone returned in great shape. It's like a massive pat on your back for yourself for the program that you give it. I actually changed my tune a few years ago. I don't know if you remember this. I think I told you at Birmingham. I said in one of the preseason videos when they wanted all the classic stuff, I went, no, well, basically, if the players have done the work that they were given, they'll survive. So it's up to those who haven't done the work to hang on. And it was like, even when the lads pulled me the following day to kind of say, what did you mean by that? Like, I said, Well, preseason's damn hard. So if you haven't done the work, you're in trouble. The level you turned up was your expected level, not any praise for it.
No, it's a good point actually. But I think, and it would be really interesting, wouldn't it, to pull up every team's pre-season video after that camp, or at the end of pre-season, and then see how they all start, because not all of them can be right, can they? They can't all have had a fantastic pre-season and the team are ready to go and whatever. But I think, there is an element of getting through it, isn't there, and building that volume and building that, the sort of understanding football wise. I think that's how I try to do it, and how we've done it quite well in the past. Obviously, we're both aware. I think sometimes that's how having a good relationship together, you can make sure, you've seen it at clubs where the manager's maybe fighting the head of performance a little bit because he thinks it should be done one way, and and vice versa, and actually creates problems in terms of how much each department do. I think it has to be combined, doesn't it? It has to be a one approach. It has to be a synergistic way of doing it in terms of, I have to understand the physical parameters that need to come out of pre-season, and you guys want that to fit into the football side of it because they both go hand in hand, So I think there is a very different approach now. I think that, it started to come in, I think around sort of Mourinho's time, when it was all the 4v4 stuff, the Bangsbo heart rate stuff, wasn't it? That was almost felt quite revolutionary at the time, but then everybody did it. So I think everybody now realizes that a lot of the work they can get might be able to be done within the football side of things, and there's times where,
but not all of it.
Not all of it, Dave.
No, we still need to get them on the line. They still need to hear that whistle blow.
Well, I think they do, don't they? Because I think there's times where, from a psychology point of view, it needs to feel hard as well, doesn't it? It needs to feel like there's a challenge to it. It needs to feel like you've got to make one more run, like the 94th minute in a game or whatever that might be, 4 weeks down the line. I think there's also an element of, I believe there's also an element of you're playing a game of football, there's one ball and there's 22 players, so realistically you're running off the ball to create space, or you're running off the ball to receive the ball, or you're running to follow track a runner, or you're pressing, or you're recovering. So there's so many elements of the game that involve those sheer forces of nature where you have to get on the line and run and be able to maintain that. But there's also lots of different work that can go in. So from a manager's perspective, head coach's perspective, of course, you're trying to layer in the little ways that you want to play. Now, some of the players that have been there might understand that already. You might be working on a different formation. You might want to work on two formations because you feel that maybe the season before you've been a little bit rigid and perhaps you need something different. You might have new players there. So I think, we would plan a pre-season, wouldn't we, where, I would put in the football things that I think we need. You would put in the physical things that you think you need. And then we would sit down and almost discuss, how do they sit together? Do we need to adjust that? What do we need to work? Will that day be too heavy? Will those 3 or 4 days be too heavy? Because the last thing you want is to hit the players so hard, both from a tactical, technical, and a physical perspective, that people start picking up injuries, don't you? So there's a lot of planning that actually goes into that pre-season program, isn't there?
Yeah, I think obviously the word we would use kind of on the inside would be the periodization of the work that we do, and that goes from the work we do on an individual day across a number of days, but also across the weeks. So how are we balancing the load across weeks? We know what we need to put in there. But it's, when do you put it? At what stage do you do that type of session? When do you do that type of session? The knock-on effects from one session to the next. And certainly if you've got a good integrated approach between the coaching team, the performance team, the medical team should be, they're not going to be unemployed because there's so much work that they've got to do in keeping people on the road as such. They're patching people up from time to time. But if you've set out the plan for your preseason really well, it kind of flows from a good introduction to maybe a 2.5 weeks of some really, really solid work of building conditioning, but also building your philosophy of play. And if we do it right and we've got a good kind of balance to the work, of course, you may find some people fall off the wagon because they just haven't got the capacity to keep up. And we do our best to try and help those players, don't we? We do try and load manage them so that we get everyone to the start line as much as possible. But not everyone gets there. But you're trying to also build that philosophy. It's not just general football training. You're trying to build sessions and weeks so that you start getting the team to play as you want. And then we start appearing into games, don't we? And then it's getting minutes in the bank. Or is it minutes in the legs? Who knows?
Minutes in something. I don't know what it is, but they need the minutes, don't they? I think that's really important. I think I think after a couple of weeks of training, I think the players are ready for games. And I think the players want to see some of the work that you've done and feel that in games, because players will say it, won't they? And it's right, really, but you can do all the work that you need to do, but that competition element and that game playing, feels a little bit different physically, doesn't it? It just feels you've got, not necessarily pre-season the nerves, but you've got the energy, the energy preparing for a game, thinking about a game again, having to manage the game, the communication within the game. There's all sorts of things. So we would build that up, wouldn't we? Predominantly, we would play maybe a 90-minute game where everyone would play 45 minutes. Feed them in. We'd have done a training ground game first, maybe for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, the same.
Yeah.
We'd probably then start to ramp that up a little bit, maybe another 45 or maybe into 60s. That's always been a challenge, isn't it? Trying to get someone to play 260s in a game. We've never quite managed that. Some teams have. It's tough one to watch, I think, for the fans. But it's predominantly about exposing those players, isn't it, to different amounts of game time and maybe not jumping in too quickly into those 90s, which is quite ironic, really, isn't it? Because during the season, sometimes you would chuck a player. If a player had come back and he was so important and he'd been out for 6 weeks, sometimes you'd chuck him straight back into a 90-minute game, wouldn't you? I mean, you might not expect him to last that long, but
we prefer not to. But sometimes needs must.
But sometimes you have to.
Pre-season, we don't really have to risk anyone. So we build that kind of stepwise process, really going 45, 60s and into 90s, don't we? And spreading everybody out across games. So some days we have double-header games, don't we? And in a midweek double-header where you'll see 2 11s for a club playing in completely different places. We've got to split the squad, split the staff to make sure that everyone's able to get the exposure to the game time that they need.
And that's always a challenge, isn't it? Because people will see. I mean, it'd be very easy as a manager to pick really favourable games pre-season so that you win the majority of them. You maybe score plenty of goals. Players have got a lot of confidence from it. But if you don't replicate who you're going to play against or the type of games you're going to play against, it's just going to make the season more difficult, isn't it? So that double-headed game we have on the same night essentially is to guarantee and make sure that every player gets 90 minutes, isn't it? Like we hope that and we will say before those games that we might lose both of those games to teams maybe a couple of divisions below. We might lose games late on where we would normally make a substitution, but we don't want to do that. This is as much a physical process for the players to feel that 90 minutes in their legs, isn't it? So
it's a fitness exercise.
Yes. It's nice if you do get through. And of course, also you have to balance it off. So you have to balance. So we would normally split the teams pretty evenly.
Yeah.
So that, you'd have 2 or 3 young players in there. You'd have 2 or 3 players that maybe wouldn't be necessarily starters in there. So straight away, you've got half your team that probably wouldn't be in your starting team necessarily on day one. So it would be potentially a bit weaker. But occasionally with those games, the interesting bit is someone stands out more than someone that you'd expect to do really well. You might have a young player who's had the opportunity to come up in pre-season. You think, wow, he's done really well. He's been one of our better players. That certainly happened to us last pre-season. We had a couple of young players come through that were probably the standout performers. And you're always trying to balance that off. It's pre-season and the season's very different. But at the same time, it's an opportunity to impress for a young player, isn't it, and a young footballer. So those games would be predominantly around. We try to theme each game a little bit and say, right, this is what we're looking at. That's how I would shape the approach to the game. Look, we're playing a team in a conference. Let's say, let's focus on our build up. Let's focus on our in possession. We're playing a better team. Let's focus on the way that we press. Let's focus. And you're not just going to do that, but sometimes it's easy just to chunk it down for that little bit of learning pre-season, isn't it? And try and at least see what you want to get out of it.
So one of the big periods, of course, where we used to build things, and it's a really important part, it's building that kind of team cohesion and camaraderie, is the obligatory pre-season tour, which is either we've always gone for it in the kind of second week of pre-season, haven't we? We've had a solid training week back at base, and then we will go away and we'll have another training week. However, some clubs go a little bit later. They use it as a games-based kind of camp or tour. And it is an important time. You'll often hear, again, in the interviews that you'll hear from clubs that they put out, it's about building the team and building that camaraderie. That's really probably half of the reason you're out there, is to give everyone a chance to just focus. But without going into it in too much depth, is that really what we achieve when we go on those pre-season camps?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think. I think we like to go quite early, don't we? I think a lot of the bigger teams actually would go and have a week where the fitness element would be sort of a high priority within the football work. And then they'd go away again a little bit later in pre-season to play games. And I think we've always found that not having the games as a logistical issue, you can just work for the week, but it makes it harder to pick a location because you need everything to be a little bit better. I think there's nothing like, as a player, there's nothing like spending a week away with a group of guys, or girls, whatever that might be, and building that team spirit, because you're spending time together, you're working together, you're living together, you're eating together. Every evening the lads will sit and they might have a little game of cards, or they might just sit chatting with a coffee or whatever that is, but they will actively spend time together. And I think that builds a spirit of sorts. That allows new players they're forced into that mix of, you're going to have to get to know the players pretty quick. And we've often had players come away after a week and said, what a great group of players. What a great bunch. And I think a lot of that is because you are forced into that, spending plenty of time together, and you've also got the time as coaches to do more with the players, haven't you? So you can have lots more meetings because the players aren't doing much in the evening, not going home to their families. You can talk about standards which are going to be important during the season. You can talk about you can do some team building exercises, which we've done before to varying degrees of success, I would suggest. But again,
like those escape rooms in Ireland, that was fun to watch the players try and figure out logical things.
That was really interesting, wasn't it? Because if you'd have seen that and you'd have chose your leaders in those situations, you would have gone for very different leaders, wouldn't you? I mean, I don't know how. Absolutely. I know sometimes these things, people, if it's a military base that you go to, they'll say, we'll tell you who the leaders are. I don't know whether an escape room necessarily. There's an element of intelligence also comes down to the one that's talking but it's interesting to see different players working in different ways, and also you get the same thing. You also get the cynical ones, don't you? You always get the 2 or 3 at the start go, this is rubbish. What are we doing this for? And then 30 minutes into it, they're in it and they're involved with everyone else because it's almost like a coping mechanism in it because they don't know what to do, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the first thing is for your classic footballer is say everything is terrible, and then when it's actually good, say it was all right, but actually you really enjoyed it. And if you ever become a coach, they're going to bring it. Ireland was interesting, wasn't it? Like that. If you're UK based, you kind of go one of 4 ways in your preseason, don't you? You go somewhere that's got a similar climate, but it's just different. So you go to Ireland, you go to Scotland, or sometimes people go to Wales. You go for somewhere for a different football experience, which would be like, let's pop over to Holland and let's get absolutely. Well, that used to be the case. You get absolutely footballed off the planet. You go for the mountains in Austria, or you go for the heat of Spain, or something like that. They're your kind of 4 classic pre-season tour locations.
They are, and it's funny actually because I've never ever. I'm pretty sure I've never done Austria, even as a player. Definitely not as a manager.
Okay, yeah. No
Yeah,
yodeling up there in the mountains.
yeah. I always think it's a strange one, isn't it? If you're going to take players away for a week, in some ways, my motivation has always been, you get a better climate. You know that you're going to get a week of probably a little bit of sunshine where you can stay out and work, and the players will work. They'll tend to work longer. Of course, there's a challenge with that because there's times where you could be training, it could be 30 degrees, and it's actually you've got to limit the intensity a little bit. So I suppose at least
That's why
go
the players
somewhere.
like it.
That's why most people do it. Yeah, absolutely. So, and I actually quite enjoyed our ones in Scotland and Ireland because they were pretty similar, but you were still away. You could still go. You could go somewhere different. It was a different environment, and I thought it was really interesting. But I think ultimately, it doesn't really matter where you go, does it? I think it's always the same. You want pitches that are on par. The challenge is getting pitches on par with your own pitches, because why go somewhere where the pitches are far worse? That doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's always hard to do. You need to make sure you've got the perfect thing, isn't it? What's your analogy of what you need from a training camp? Because you've somehow, Dave, you've managed to go on a lot of recce's of a couple of seasons. It's taken a long time over that summer to find the perfect camp, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you kind of go with what I like to call it the F mentality or the F philosophy.
Go on.
So, first of all, what are we there for? We're there for football. So football facilities, then you need fitness, so whether that's a gym, you need those good things. An army marches on its stomach, does it? So it needs good food.
Yeah.
You then need good facilities. So the accommodation, the hotel environment needs to be nice, and you need something to do, which is fun. So it's the five Fs. The five Fs of pre-season. Football, fitness, food, facilities, and fun. There you go, everyone.
I like it, mate.
That's for free.
Hey, that is unbelievable. Football circus. Incredible.
It's the method. It's the method for getting a good pre-season camp.
Because it's the only time you're allowed to have fun when the games haven't started.
Well, that's it. Yeah, no team has been picked at this stage, but of course, you get back from the preseason camp. You got a few of those games. Suddenly, it's preseason finished yet because the games are just around the corner. We know that the first game is coming, and the whole of preseason is building to a crescendo where eventually you've got to start picking teams that look like the team that you're going to pick.
But I'll be honest, I think I get to that point as a manager, I'm sure you do as well, but you get to that point maybe 4 weeks. I would say 4 weeks in, you get 4 weeks of good quality work. You can do a lot of the things that you can't do during the season. You can have a real focus. There's a lot of focus on obviously trying to bring players in as well still, because, the days of getting all your team sorted before the first day are, it's hardly been any signings now at all. And most teams are back, so I think with the Euros particularly, that's gonna drag that on a little bit, longer. So I think what's interesting is you get to that period where the games are the games, but they're not the same. They're just not the same. You're trying to recreate a football match. It is a football match. You've got fans there, but it's not the same as something when there's 3 points on it. And you get 4 weeks in, and I think the last 2 weeks is like, just want the season to start. I want the season to start. I think we're ready.
There's more time for more fitness. Let's get more. No way. Lads are saying, stop the running. Let's play football.
You guys have made a plea, haven't you, to extend the season so you can have a longer pre-season, so you can do your work for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Hey, Australian rules football, 16-week pre-season. Look at them. The guys run 16 kilometres in a game. You give us a few more weeks, we'll get lads who run even further in matches.
That'll be heaven. How many more bleep tests can we find? So, but again, I think we all get to that point, don't we, where you want the real thing. It's great. Yeah. It's really important. It's an important period, but you want the real thing. And also often, sometimes the results can shape how you feel about pre-season. It shouldn't do, should it? Because, when you've had lots and lots of pre-seasons like we have, you get a poor result, everyone's panicking a little bit, and we'll have a meeting the next day and we'll listen, let's stay calm. all of our players are fit. We've got everybody through pre-season. We're ready for the start of the season. I've had brilliant pre-seasons where people think we're going to win the league, and then we've had horrific first 6 games. I've had horrendous pre-seasons where you think it's the end of the world. You think you might get sacked before the season starts. That'll be a new one. I've actually felt like that. And you start the season really well. So you get to learn, don't you, that you can't get too carried away. It is a period of improvement. It is a period of learning. It's a period of preparation for the players. And it's not the same as the start of a season. So getting everybody through it really unscathed, but with the fitness levels we need and want. And obviously those two are a real challenge, aren't they? They're a real kind of juxtaposition of sorts, aren't they? Because, you've got to push the players to get them to where we want. Therefore, there comes a risk. So it's trying to find that balance all the time, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. And as we say, like the ultimate test of your pre-season is in those probably first 6 games of the season, where you kind of are weighed and measured by your team's performance, how they look like they last in games. And it's only at that point we sit down and review pre-season and start to make notes for the following one, like as we've always done. We sit down after a few weeks and go, right, okay, on reflection, what could we have done better? And that's the process, isn't it? And then we repeat it all over again. But for everyone out there now, they can tune into the social media channels. They'll see it's the one time of the year when the media team get to be on camera meeting all the players as they leave their cars, carry their boots in. Somebody's always got a new haircut. And then it's testing, 1, 2, 3, and everyone's on the line and we're running again.
We need to do a breaking line series of pictures of players on holiday at a training camp. Are they really working, or is this just for the Insta? Yeah, yes, or yeah. We could do a new series on that, I think, and show some pictures and invite opinion from that.
Yeah, we'll get that out, and also watch out for the bingo card of listen to your club's pre-season video and see if all the cliches come out. But we'll catch up on the end of pre-season as the season's about to begin and see where we think people have got to.
Absolutely, yeah. Looking forward to it, but glad. Would like to have been back into a club pre-season, but kind of glad I'm not a player in there on the start line, waiting for you to blow your whistle, Dave.
Yes, it's more fun behind the whistle than in front of it. All right, we'll catch up soon. Thanks, Gary.
Take care. See ya.